The rain had been falling since early morning, the kind of steady, unhurried rain that soaks into the earth and turns the air heavy with the smell of wet pine. From my bedroom window in our old Charleston, South Carolina house, I watched the water slide down the glass in thin, twisting trails. That house had been mine as much as anyone's, my childhood tucked away in its creaky floorboards, the wallpaper faded from years of summer sunlight, the kitchen table worn smooth from countless breakfasts. It should have felt safe. But that morning, there was a heaviness in my chest that made even the rain feel sharper. When Mom called me to the living room, I could hear the difference in her voice. Not the warm tone that used to pull me in for cookies after school. No, this was clipped, almost rehearsed. I stepped into the room and found her standing near the mantel, her hands folded tightly in front of her. Beside her, leaning casually against the arm of the sofa, was Victor Hayes. I had met him a few times before, tall, with a neatly trimmed beard and that kind of forced smile that never touched his eyes. Even without speaking, Victor had a way of making you feel as if you were already on the losing side of some silent argument. She didn't bother easing into it. "I'm getting married," she said, almost like she was delivering the news to a stranger in passing. My stomach tightened, not because she was marrying again, Dad had been out of the picture for years, but because of the way she looked at me when she said it. It wasn't joy I saw in her eyes. It was something closer to calculation. Victor straightened and slid his arm loosely around her shoulders, like a man claiming property. "We're moving forward with our lives," he said, his voice smooth in a way that made my skin crawl. I was still processing it when Mom added the words that would burn into me for years to come. "You're nothing but a laborer working in the cave. You don't belong here anymore." For a moment, the sound of the rain seemed to disappear, replaced by the roar of blood in my ears. I stared at her, waiting for the smirk, the laugh, the sign that this was some awful joke. But there was no softness in her expression, only the faint satisfaction of someone who'd finally said what they'd been holding back. From the corner of the room, my older brother Daniel laughed. Not the belly laugh of someone amused, but short, cutting chuckle meant to sting. "Laborers have no place in our lives," he added, leaning back in the armchair like a man settling into a throne. His voice dripped with mockery. I didn't answer them. I didn't need to. In that moment, I realized they knew nothing about me, nothing about what I'd been doing or what I was worth. The cave they referred to wasn't some grim, underground prison of sweat and dust. It was my gold mine in Nevada, the one I'd inherited from Grandpa Thomas when I was 23. They didn't know that I had modernized it, hired a small crew, and quietly built contracts with jewelers and investors. They didn't know that just last year, I'd sold part of the extracted gold for over $3.2 million. In their minds, I was still the girl who worked hard for scraps, the one who didn't fit into their new polished life. I wanted to tell them the truth right then and there, to watch their smug expressions collapse under the weight of it. But something in me held back. A strange calm settled over me. Let them believe what they want, I thought. The day will come when they'll see exactly who I am. Mom shifted her weight, clearly eager to be done with the conversation. "It's best for everyone," she said, not meeting my eyes. Victor's hand tightened on her shoulder in silent agreement. I nodded slowly, even as my heart ached in my chest. "If that's how you feel," I said quietly. My voice sounded foreign to me, steady but cold. I went to my room without another word. Every creak of the hallway floorboards felt like it echoed through the house. I pulled my old suitcase from under the bed, the same one I'd taken to college, and began folding my clothes. There wasn't much, just enough to fill 2 bags. The whole time, I moved with a strange, deliberate slowness, like I was watching myself from the outside. The rain was louder now, pounding against the tin roof over the back porch. I paused for a moment, my hand resting on the windowsill, and looked out at the yard. I remembered summer barbecues out there, chasing fireflies with Daniel when we were little. I remembered Dad's voice drifting from the grill, telling us stories about how he and Mom had bought this house when they were barely older than I was now. Those memories felt like someone else's life, distant and untouchable. When I came back into the living room, both Mom and Victor were gone. Daniel was still there, sprawled in the armchair, scrolling on his phone. He didn't look up when I passed. I could have said goodbye, could have asked why he thought he had the right to laugh at me like that. But I didn't give him the satisfaction. I set my bags by the door and slipped on my jacket. The air in the room felt stale, heavy with all the words that had been spoken, and all the ones left unsaid. I opened the front door, and the cool dampness of the night wrapped around me. For a second, I stood there, my hand on the doorknob, listening to the rain on the porch roof and the faint hum of the streetlights. There was no one to stop me, no one to tell me to stay. And maybe that was the point. I stepped out into the wet street, the soft splash of water under my boots the only sound. The house loomed behind me, its windows glowing faintly in the dark, but it no longer felt like home. Home, I realized, isn't where you live. It's where you're wanted. As I walked toward my truck parked a block away, I thought about the mine in Nevada, the contracts waiting in my email, the gold still buried deep in the earth, waiting for the right hands to bring it to light. I thought about how, in their rush to push me out, they'd also set me free. By the time I reached the truck, my jacket was soaked through, but I didn't care. I climbed in, turned the key, and felt the old engine rumble to life. The windshield wipers swiped away the rain in slow, steady arcs, clearing the road ahead. I didn't look back as I pulled away from the curb. I didn't need to. That chapter of my life had just closed, and whatever was waiting for me next was mine alone to write. The drive out of South Carolina felt longer than it actually was, maybe because I was leaving more behind than just a house. 3 states stretched out in front of me, each mile unwinding like a thread being pulled from an old sweater. I took back roads when I could, avoiding the heavy interstate traffic, letting the landscape change slowly, pine forests giving way to open fields, the air turning drier as I pushed west. The little blue pickup, a gift from Grandpa Thomas years ago, carried everything I own now: 2 suitcases, a locked metal box with my mine records, and a brown leather journal I'd been writing in since I was 17. I had no fixed plan when I set out, but somewhere past Kansas, the thought of Denver kept coming back to me. I'd visited once before, years ago, when Grandpa took me to meet a mining equipment supplier. I remembered the mountains in the distance, their snow caps sharp against the sky, and the crisp air that made everything smell clean. Denver felt like the right place to start over, far enough from the past to be out of reach, close enough to my business to keep an eye on everything. When I arrived, it was late afternoon. The sun was beginning to dip, turning the city gold. I found a small red brick house on a quiet street just a short drive from the downtown warehouses. It had white shutters, a wide porch, and a backyard big enough for a garden if I ever decided to plant one. The asking price was $280,000. I didn't blink. I wrote the check in cash, right there in the realtor's office. Her eyebrows rose, and she tried not to ask too many questions. Settling in was easier than I thought it would be. The neighborhood was full of people who smiled politely but didn't pry. They saw me as just another quiet woman with a dog. Well, soon to be, since I'd been thinking of adopting one and a truck. Nobody guessed that my mornings often started with calls to jewelers in New York or traders in London, Europe, or that I managed shipments of raw gold worth hundreds of thousands of dollars every month. I liked it that way. My workdays were nothing like the picture my family had painted of me. There were no dark tunnels, no soot on my face, no endless swinging of pickaxes. I worked in jeans and clean boots, sometimes even heels if the meeting called for it. My cave was a set of modern offices in a renovated Denver warehouse, the walls lined with polished wood and maps of mining sites. I signed contracts at a polished oak desk, the hum of computers in the background, the scent of fresh coffee drifting in from the small kitchen. Every week, trucks left my storage facility carrying crates marked only with codes, bound for airports and shipping companies. From there, the gold traveled to New York, London, and occasionally to private collectors who paid in advance for the right to own something so rare. I had built the network myself, piece by piece, over years of careful relationships and trust. Grandpa's mine in Nevada was still operating, producing a steady stream of ore, but now I also had shares in 2 smaller sites in Colorado. The business was growing faster than I'd imagined when I first took it over. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit on my porch with a cup of tea, watching the lights of Denver stretch out toward the mountains. I'd think about how Mom and Daniel still probably pictured me, tired, dirty, shoulders bent from hauling rock. I imagine their surprise if they could see me now, talking with investors over video calls, reviewing market charts, signing deals in climate-controlled boardrooms. It made me smile, not out of spite, but from a quiet sense of satisfaction. They had underestimated me, and I had let them. The first winter in Denver was cold but bright. Snow dusted the streets and rooftops, turning the red bricks of my house into something out of a postcard. I learned the rhythm of the city. The farmer's market on Saturdays, the coffee shop on the corner where the barista started remembering my order, the way the mountains seemed to glow pink in the early morning light. It was different from Charleston, but it didn't take long for it to feel like mine. I made a few friends, though I kept my business details vague. People knew I worked in gold, but they assumed it was in jewelry or sales, not direct mining. That was fine with me. The fewer questions, the better. I wasn't hiding out of shame. I was simply protecting what I'd built. I had seen too many people lose what they had by trusting the wrong hands. The money gave me freedom, but it also gave me options I'd never had before. I could buy equipment outright, pay my workers well above the industry standard, and still have enough to invest in new ventures. I opened a separate account for community projects, funding a scholarship at the local technical college, quietly paying the winter heating bills for a few struggling families in the area. I didn't announce it or put my name on anything. Giving quietly felt better, like I was planting seeds no one else needed to see grow. There were moments, of course, when the loneliness crept in. Even success doesn't completely drown out the echo of being told you don't belong. I missed having someone to call just to share good news. Sometimes, when a deal went through, or when the mine hit a record month, I'd instinctively reach for my phone, only to remember there was no one from my old life I wanted to call. Those moments passed, but they left a sting. Still, Denver gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: stability. I had a home, a thriving business, and the freedom to shape my life without someone else's shadow over it. I could choose who came into my circle and who stayed out. That power was intoxicating in its quiet way. One evening in early spring, as I was closing up my office, I got a call from a major buyer in New York. They wanted to negotiate a long-term contract that could potentially double my annual revenue. I stood there in the fading light of my office, phone in hand, looking at the framed map of Nevada on the wall. I thought about how far I'd come from that rainy night in Charleston. The deal would take weeks to finalize, and there would be plenty of late-night calls and careful planning ahead. But in that moment, standing in my own office, in a city I had chosen, surrounded by the business I had built from nothing, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Pride, without apology. Denver wasn't just a new chapter. It was the proof that I could survive the loss of everything I thought I needed, and still come out richer in more ways than one. 2 years had passed since I'd arrived in Denver, and the life I had built was steady, solid, and thriving. The gold business had expanded far beyond my original projections. The Nevada mine was producing at record capacity, and my 2 smaller Colorado claims had proven richer than expected. By the time I added in the long-term contracts I'd secured with jewelers in New York and refiners in London, the numbers on my books still sometimes made me pause. I had kept a low profile all this time, preferring to let the business speak for itself. That changed the day my office phone rang with a call from a production assistant in Los Angeles. Her voice was bright, quick, and confident. She told me that the producers of a national television program were putting together a special feature called America's Self-Made Women. They had been combing through business records, industry articles, and trade awards to find stories worth telling. My name, she said, had come up again and again. At first, I hesitated. The thought of cameras, microphones, and bright studio lights wasn't exactly appealing. I liked my quiet life, where very few people knew the scope of my success. But she kept talking, explaining how the segment would inspire other women to take control of their futures, to see that starting from nothing didn't mean staying there. That part hit me. If my story could give even one woman the push to walk away from people who underestimated her, maybe it was worth it. So, I agreed. The weeks leading up to the interview were a blur of preparation. The producers sent over sample questions and a list of topics they wanted to cover. My early life in Charleston, the inheritance of the mine, how I expanded the business, and what my plans were for the future. They didn't know about my family's betrayal. I hadn't decided yet how much of that I would share. Some wounds didn't need to be put on display for strangers to prod at. The morning of the interview, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror in Denver, holding up 2 blazers to decide between them. I settled on a deep navy one that brought out the warm tones in my skin. I paired it with gold earrings, real gold, of course, and my favorite lipstick, the one that made me feel like I could walk into any room and own it. The flight to Los Angeles was uneventful, though my mind churned the entire way. I thought about the people who might be watching. Investors, partners, competitors, sure. But also Mom, Daniel, Victor. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I could already imagine the look on her face when she saw me not just surviving, but standing in front of the whole country as the owner of a multi-million-dollar business. The studio was a rush of activity when I arrived. Crew members carrying cables, camera operators adjusting equipment, producers with clipboards hurrying between sets. They ushered me into a small green room with soft lighting and a table of snacks. I didn't touch the food. My stomach was too tight with anticipation. A makeup artist gave me a final touch-up, dusting powder across my cheekbones and smoothing the edges of my lipstick. "You're going to do great," she said with an easy smile, as if she could sense my nerves. When they called me to the set, I walked out under the blinding brightness of studio lights. The host, a well-known journalist named Marion Porter, greeted me warmly and led me to the seating area. The cameras were already rolling. We started with small talk, the kind meant to make viewers feel at home, how I liked Denver, how I got into mining, what my typical workday looked like. Then Marion leaned forward, her tone shifting from casual to curious. 2 years ago, most people had never heard of you, she said. Now your name is on the lips of every major gold trader in America and Europe. Tell us, how did you do it? I told the story as I wanted it told, about Grandpa Thomas leaving me the Nevada mine, about modernizing operations, expanding to new claims, and building relationships with international buyers. I left out the betrayal. The rain-soaked night I left Charleston, the 780 miles of highway between me and the people who had thrown me away. That part was mine to keep. She listened intently, nodding as I spoke. Then she asked the question I knew would come. How much is your gold business worth now? The answer was simple, but I let a small smile spread before I said it. Somewhere around $12 million. There was a beat of silence in the studio, just long enough for the weight of the number to settle, before Marion leaned back and laughed softly, shaking her head. Incredible. What happened next took me by surprise. The phone lines in the studio, open for live viewer calls, lit up in a cascade of flashing lights. Assistants scrambled to answer them as messages began flooding in. Some were from women wanting advice. Others were from small business owners offering congratulations. A few were from potential partners wanting to work together. I knew Mom was watching. I could almost picture her, sitting in the living room of whatever house she now shared with Victor, staring at the screen, her expression caught somewhere between disbelief and regret. Daniel, maybe pacing, maybe silent. The interview wrapped up with Marion asking about my future plans. I spoke about expanding into environmentally responsible mining methods, investing in community programs, and perhaps one day writing a book about my journey. When the cameras finally cut, the crew relaxed, people moved around, and someone pressed a cool bottle of water into my hand. Marion gave me a warm hug and told me I had inspired a lot of people that day. Back in the green room, I finally exhaled. My phone was in my bag, and I had resisted checking it the entire time. Now, curiosity got the better of me. I pulled it out and saw the notifications. Hundreds of them. Missed calls, texts, emails. Far more than I'd ever seen in one place before. And in the middle of it all, dozens of calls from a single number. Mom's. I didn't open the messages yet. I just sat there for a moment, phone in my lap, the muffled noise of the studio fading behind me. I had just stood under the brightest lights in the country and told the world exactly who I was on my terms. And somewhere, The people who once told me I had no place in their lives had just learned, in the most public way possible, how wrong they'd been. I wasn't wrong about Mom watching the interview. By the time I got back to my house in Denver, it was well past midnight. The flight home from Los Angeles had been quiet, the hum of the plane giving me too much space to think. I'd replayed the interview in my mind, the way the lights fell on my skin, the slight pause before I said, $12 million, the sound of the host's voice echoing with admiration. I set my bag down on the couch and, for the first time all day, checked my phone. The number made me freeze. 780 missed calls. At first, I thought it had to be a glitch. But when I scrolled through the call log, I saw the same number over and over. Mom's number. Between the calls were dozens of voice messages, their little red dots lined up like beads on a string. For a long time, I didn't press play. I just sat there, holding the phone in both hands, staring at it like it was some strange object I'd never seen before. My chest was tight, not with anger this time, but with a different kind of pressure, like standing at the edge of a decision you can't unmake once you step forward. When I finally played the first message, her voice filled the quiet room. "Honey, it's your mother."
I didn't mean what I said back then.
"You have to understand. Victor was just influencing me. We can start over. Please call me." The next message was similar, her tone switching between soft pleading and strained laughter, like she was trying to pretend nothing had happened. By the fifth or sixth message, the cracks were showing. There was frustration in her voice, regret, confusion. I listened to only a handful before I set the phone down on the coffee table and stepped outside onto the porch. The air was cool, and the city lights stretched out toward the mountains in the distance. Denver always seemed so still at night, as if it were holding its breath. The wood of the porch railing was smooth beneath my hands. I traced it absent-mindedly, my mind drifting back to Charleston, the smell of rain on pine, the creak of the hallway floor, the look on Mom's face when she told me I didn't belong. I had carried that moment with me for years, like a stone in my pocket. Heavy, cold, always there. Part of me wanted to answer her call right then. To say, "Yes, I remember. I remember every word." To ask her why she thought it was acceptable to throw me away. To see if she could even explain herself without hiding behind Victor's shadow. But another part of me, the part that had spent the last years building something from the ground up, didn't want to hand her that piece of me. She had chosen her life without me. I had built mine without her. I went back inside, poured myself a glass of water, and sat in the living room. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. On the wall above the fireplace was a framed map of Nevada, the gold cave marked with a small brass pin. I thought about everything it had given me. Not just wealth, but freedom, purpose, the ability to stand on my own 2 feet without anyone's permission. My mind flicked through the people who had been there for me along the way, workers who stuck through the hard seasons, buyers who took a chance on my shipments, the friends in Denver who treated me as just another neighbor without prying into my bank account. They had earned their place in my life. Mom had forfeited hers. The phone buzzed again, vibrating against the table. Another call from the same number. I let it ring. I wondered if the sudden flood of affection from her was about me, or about the millions. Money changes people, sometimes in ways that strip them bare. I didn't know if she wanted her daughter back or just a share of what her daughter had built. That uncertainty made it easier not to answer. Hours passed, but I didn't go to bed. I sat on the porch again, the cool air sharp on my face, the city lights flickering faintly. Somewhere in the darkness, a train horn sounded, low and mournful, like it was traveling from one life to another. I thought about the word laborer, the insult she had used so easily, the label Daniel had laughed at. They had meant it to diminish me, to make me small. But if being a laborer meant working for something with my own hands, shaping a life from raw material, then yes, I had been one. Only my labor had turned into gold. I was no longer the girl who left Charleston in the rain with 2 suitcases. I was the woman who ran a business worth more than she could have imagined back then. I was the woman who had turned betrayal into fuel. I didn't know if I'd ever call Mom back. Maybe one day. Maybe never. But I did know that I would wake up tomorrow and keep building, keep growing, keep living on my terms. The night was still, and wide open around me. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly, feeling the weight in my chest loosen. My phone was still inside, still buzzing now and then, but out here under the quiet Denver sky, it didn't matter. I had my life, my gold cave, my freedom, and that was worth more than any apology that came too late.